webinar, A Guide for New Leaders, Part 2, Managing Up. This webinar is sponsored by the Emory Alumni Association and Office of Alumni Career Services. Thank you all for taking time out of your workday to join us. I'm thrilled to be here with Bill Gentry, PhD, graduate of the college, and Jody Sharlop, a leadership coach and also graduate of Oxford and the college. As many of you probably know, Jody and Bill are frequent webinar presenters on this program, and they did present part 1 last month. So if you missed it, I will be sure to send you the recording of that link. And they will be presenting the final installment next month on organizational politics. So sign up for that if you have not. And just a reminder, today's presentation is being recorded, so you can access the replay of this webinar on our Emory University YouTube channel in a few business days. And I will send out a link so that you can review the over 70 past career webinars that we have hosted on a variety of professional subjects. And I appreciate those of you who sent in questions or scenarios in advance for us to review. Jody and Bill have tailored their content to focus on those areas today. But we will also leave some time at the end of the presentation for live Q&A. So if you have anything that you're thinking about during the session, go ahead and type that in so that we can maximize that time. And a bit more about our presenters. As I said, Bill Gentry is a PhD and leadership researcher and author of Be the Boss Everyone Wants to Work For, A Guide for New Leaders, which some of you in Atlanta might have attended his workshop about this book this past spring, which was very well received. And in addition, Bill is an adjunct professor at several colleges and universities. His research on political skill and derailment in the workplace, leader character and integrity, and first-time managers has been featured in more than 50 internet and newspaper outlets, including Harvard Business Review, CNN.com, and the Wall Street Journal. And founder of Potential Matters and Acceleration Partners and coaching partner at the Emory Alumni Association, Jody Sharlop specializes in working with professionals who have at least 10 years of experience and who want to build careers that matter and become leaders that matter. And I'll be sure to send you more information on Jody and Bill so that you can follow up and learn more about their work. Thank you both for joining us today. Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks a lot for having us. So I just want to say hi to everybody, and Jody, I'll have you say hi to everybody as well before we get started.
Glad to be here from sunny Amsterdam. So
yeah, it's a miracle what technology can do. You can do webinars from wherever you are in the world, pretty much. So thanks, Jody, for being here, even from Europe. So it's great to talk to you and talk about managing up on this. So we're going to try to have some real fun today and talk about a couple things. Jody and I are going to be talking about, based on the research from my books, a very high-level overview of 6 really important aspects. I call them flips, and we'll be talking about flips and what that means in order to be effective. But what we're going to be doing a deep dive into is that managing up. It's something that's part of one of the flips I call is flipping your perspective. And it's a really important topic that I get a lot. And Jody, I'm sure you get a lot about what it means to manage up as well. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the key things that we talk about in leadership and relationship building. And leadership is up, out, it's down. It's really about building positive relationships across all of your stakeholders. So this in particular is one that comes up quite often, and you hit the nail on the head. It's really about changing your perspective. So
yeah, it's because that perspective, and I'll be talking about the 6 flips again. One of them is really important about perspective, and that's where managing up comes in. And it's not just us talking about the research. We really want to leave you with practical, actionable tips, advice, support to help you as a first-time manager. If you're a new leader, if you're transitioning from a team member to a team leader, even if you have been a leader for a while but maybe never really got the training or support or development you could have had, this will be something that can help out as well. And if you're interested, please feel free to follow me at lead_better. Follow the Emory alumni folks on Twitter and use the hashtag #BeTheBossBook. It's a great way to make some connections and to keep the conversation going even after this webinar. So, one of the reasons I really wanted to write a book about what it means to transition from a rock star individual contributor to just a real great superstar leader, and it's probably one of the reasons why I'm betting, Jody, you want to work with these people as well through your coaching, through your training. making that switch from individual contributor to leader is, for the first time in your life, it's one of the biggest psychological and emotional shifts you're ever going to experience. And it's totally different than what you did in your normal everyday work. Because as an employee, what we're doing is we have all the technical skill, the technical savvy, we get all the work done. But when you transition to leadership, it's not about doing all the work anymore, and it's so much more. And based on the research I was able to do on almost 300 new leaders, I was able to find out 6 different aspects that they have to flip. And I call it flipping your script, because as an individual contributor, your script is all about me, myself, and I. It's my work, it's my technical savvy, my motivation, all the things that I can do that make me effective. That's what brings all these raises and bonuses and promotions. There's nothing wrong with that script. But when we transition to leadership, we have to flip that script around and think less about me and more about we, and more about other things. And it's thinking about, it's not about me anymore. It's not about myself anymore. It's not about what my work is. And the 6 different aspects based on the research that I was able to find was new leaders need to flip their mindset, their skill set, their relationships, their dual attitude, their perspective, and their focus. If you think about what flipping your mindset is thinking, less about having a fixed mindset where I have to be perfect in everything, and more of a growth mindset in terms of, making mistakes is okay, and I can learn from those mistakes. That's what flipping your mindset in part's all about. Flipping your skill set is thinking less about the skills that make me effective, and flipping it around and saying, those skills the technical savvy won't make me effective as a leader. It's more about communication, it's more about influence. Flipping your relationships is one of the big things that we talked about last month. So again, as Sarah said at the beginning, you can access those at any time. How do you flip your relationship from being part of a team to now leading a team? How do you flip your relationship from being a peer, or maybe even being friends, to now being a leader of those peers or friends? Flipping your do-it-all attitude is less about me doing all the work, and now it's more about me coaching and mentoring and developing others doing their work. Flipping your perspective is about what we're going to be talking about today. And then finally, flipping your focus is about how do you lead with your character and integrity intact. But the big deep dive we're going to be going into today is on flipping your perspective, and that's where the managing up comes in. When I talk about flipping your perspective, we're really talking about politics and the way that you work inside an organization. And it's less about, having a narrow perspective of getting all the work done, and broadening your perspective out and understanding how you fit in the whole system of things. Next month, we are going to be talking more about flipping your perspective in terms of organizational politics. But this month, we're going to be talking about flipping your perspective in terms of managing up. So with that, there are some tips that I kind of want to share with you. And after I share these, I'm sure Jody has some kind of tips and things for people to think about in terms of what you can do to manage up. And so I'm going to go through these list of 5 here of what you can think about when you think about managing up. And then Jody, you can jump in after that. Does that sound all right with you, Jody?
Sounds great to me, Bill.
Okay. So the first one, I don't really like the word managing up, really. I really like, if you think about it, it's helping your senior colleagues. Because if you think about what managing up, it might leave a bad taste in your mouth. It leaves a bad taste in mine. When I think about managing up, it's about, maybe I think about what it means is self-promotion, it's brown-nosing, it's bowing down, it's sucking up, it's selling out. That's what a lot of people think about when they think about managing up. But what I want to tell people is flipping their script and think about, it's not managing up. Don't think of it as managing your boss or superiors. Really think of it as helping your senior colleagues. Managing your boss, again, it sounds like you're trying to wrangle some sort of wild animal around. But if you think about helping your senior colleagues, that's a little less formal, it's a little less stuffy, but it still shows the respect that your boss and superiors deserve. And it also lessens some sort of pressure, and it sounds a little less manipulating. So that's why I really like, it's not about managing up or managing your boss, it's about helping your senior colleagues. And if you think about it, helping your senior colleagues, just like helping any other employee, it's part of your job. So if you take that responsibility of the relationship and be proactive in helping your senior colleagues help themselves, realize it's not your job to seek out and influence them. And it's not what I'm sorry, it is your job to seek out and influence them. It's not their job to find you and agree with what you want. So I'm going to repeat that again because I had a little brain freeze right there. It is your job to seek out and influence your senior colleagues. It's not their job to find you and agree with what you want. So really thinking about helping your senior colleagues as part of your job and seeking them out is important. Second, broaden your perspective, flip your perspective by really understanding what their perspective is. You obviously, as a leader, know what your perspective is and know what you need to do. But for you to even begin to help your senior colleagues help themselves, you really need to understand them. So, one of the things I encourage new leaders to do is, take a sheet of paper and think about it and write these questions down. For instance, what are your boss or your superiors, what are their pressure points? What are their pains or anxieties? What are their needs? Put yourself in their perspective. What keeps them up at night? What are their own agendas and values and goals and missions? How do they see things? Write those things down. Think about it. Maybe even have a good conversation with them one day after you've thought about it and see if it matches up well. That will help you understand their perspective more. And so that way, if you can answer those questions, you can better understand what you can do and what your team can do to make their jobs a lot easier. Third thing I like to do, some tips that we have, is aligning the needs of your senior colleagues with what you need to succeed. So maybe you need more resources to get the work done that only your senior colleagues can provide. So try to think about what you can do with finding out what your senior colleagues need to get their work done and be successful. Because you have your own wants. You definitely have your own wants. You definitely have your own needs. So if you try to align those things with what your senior colleagues want, you're both going to be in the same boat together, and it's really going to help out. Frame what you need in a way that helps them and the organization, not what you need personally. So if you think less about it from your own perspective and more about it from what do we need together, again, flipping your script from me to we, that's going to help you out a lot. So communicate with them why you and your team might be unable to get some work done effectively right now. Explain exactly how, if those things continue, it's going to hurt not just you and not just your team, but your senior colleagues as well. And you definitely don't want that to happen. So how can you provide some sort of examples to get improvements about what can happen, what you need, specific actions, specific resources? Explain exactly how your senior colleagues can help the situation as well. They want to be part of the solution probably. So again, it's not their job to find you. It's your job to help influence them. So aligning the needs of your senior colleagues with what you need, that's going to be really a great way to, again, not necessarily manage up, but to help your senior colleagues. Fourth kind of tip I like to tell people is showing your senior colleagues that you have the ability to help with their needs. If you think about it, you think about your own strengths and what you and your group can bring, and see if any of those things can help fill a need or overcome some sort of inadequacy, deficiency, or limitations given what's happening in the workplace. So how can you, again, be proactive in telling your boss, your superiors, hey, help me understand your perspective on what's going on, taking that information and thinking about how can me or my team or my peers help with their needs, help filling a gap that they have, help filling some sort of inefficiencies that they have. That could be a better way to help your senior colleagues and be much better off. And then the final tip I like to tell people is keeping your senior colleagues in the loop. Now clearly as leaders, we are busy, and your senior colleagues are just as busy. So again, it's on you to be proactive in telling your senior colleagues what's going on. You need to keep them informed because they just don't have all the time to know what's going on. So you really need to embrace it as part of your job. Again, your senior colleagues are very busy. They have multiple direct reports. So if you're in their shoes, think about what you would want them to know and purposefully manage that perception. So what you're really trying to do is, again, flipping your perspective, and it's less about what my work is now. It's even less about what my team is doing, but understanding what their perspective is all about. Communicate how your team helps your senior colleagues, the department, the function, maybe even the entire organization. That way, if you can, talk about that you'll be able to communicate that news, and they'll be able to communicate that as well up and across the organization. And finally, let your senior colleagues know of the struggles that you're having so that you can get advice and possibly some more help and resources. So this is part of your job. And again, if you think less about managing up and more about helping your senior colleagues, whether it be understanding their perspectives, understanding their needs and aligning them with your own, showing your senior colleagues that you can help and you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, resources to help them, and it's part of your job to keep them in the loop. That's a really different way of working with your senior colleagues and helping them, rather than thinking about it as managing up or kissing up or brown nosing. So that's kind of the way I like to look at how you can better have a perspective about managing up. And Jody, I know you've worked a lot with leaders, and this is a really important thing for leaders to understand. What are some things that you like to tell leaders yourself, or things that you want the audience to think about?
Well, one of the things, I love about your book, Bill, is just this whole idea of flipping your script. And when I'm working with young leaders, especially new and emerging leaders, again, we have this perception that my leader should lead me. And so that my boss or my supervisor is on this earth to lead me. And again, it's focused more on me and what the boss is doing for me. And one of the things I always say is put your leader hat on, because leaders find a way forward. And so if you're looking at your interactions with your boss as forward movement, forward momentum, you're always being proactive, pushing up, trying to, as you said, drive value through the relationship. The other thing is really thinking about keeping your leader focused on the things that matter. A lot of times, the more you move up in hierarchy, the more pressure there is on you to deliver. The business is demanding a lot. And so I always say to folks, even though maybe this is your first time role as a leader and you may be several levels down in the hierarchy, always operate as if you're reporting to the CEO, and you want to keep the CEO focused on the growth and success of the business. And so if you can focus him up and out in an effective way on the business growth, then as long as you're continuing to support channels up, then you're always keeping and playing a role in keeping the organization moving forward. And it's interesting too, Bill, because it is about taking personal responsibility, not being waited to be led, but not waiting to be led, but really taking that proactive stand. The other thing too, and I don't care where you are in the organization, it's just really thinking about, coming back to what you talked about last month in our relationships, managing up really is just treating all parties like important clients or important customers, really understanding their needs, determining how you need to communicate to have the best possible outcome, having that dialogue, again, being proactive and really influencing and finding that common ground. And I think that's really, the hallmark of kind of emerging leaders, is really seeing it as their job. The other thing you mentioned about keeping your senior colleagues in the loop, and this is a real important issue for particularly new leaders and even emerging leaders who might be in the role or have had a couple of managerial roles. Managing up and leading up and communicating up is a really powerful piece of career leadership, because leaders need your PR. In other words, just keeping them informed, socializing things to them. A lot of times they need that information, because if you want them to communicate your successes, if you want them to be a microphone for the power of your team and the value of what you're doing, you need to be able to feed them the data so they can do that. And it's interesting, because a lot of times when I have folks who are having a little bit of a challenge in the organization, when I'm working with high potential leaders, a lot of times this is where I see folks fall off the job, because it's like, my boss is so busy, he doesn't have time. I'm like, never let that busyness stop you from being proactive in your communication, socializing the things that are going well, keeping him or her informed about some of the challenges, and doing so in a high level way, because it really is be bright, be brief, be clear, be gone a lot of times, because people are moving fast. And it really hones your executive communication. But the other thing that's really interesting that bad news travels faster than good news. And so you want to build that personal PR for you and your team, and make sure that your leader has got the positive data, especially when a lot of times the negative news may travel fast. And if you've got that goodwill and that good, powerful set of communication messages that are coming out on what you're doing well, then it also kind of builds that goodwill data bank. So when things aren't going well, then your boss knows there's a treasure trove of good things that are happening. And so problems become just moments in time and not the big focus of it. So just adding a few things, Bill, I think, and really thinking about just really thinking of yourself as a leader, and helping the momentum of you and your team move forward, and that means supporting your boss to move forward as well.
Those are great points. One of the things that a lot of people talk to me about, and Joey, maybe we can riff on this for a couple minutes before we get into some questions that we have that have been given to us. A lot of people say, I just don't want to play this game. It feels like a game. It doesn't feel genuine to me to kiss up and tell my boss, manage up. And again, one of the things I tell them is think less about managing up and more about helping your senior colleagues. And that's one way to go about it. Thinking of it as it is part of your job, that's another way to go about it. But again, I might get some pushback, like I see all these other people, they're doing it, they're doing it way over the top and they're getting all the rewards, but I don't want to be like that. Is there any sort of advice or tips that you can give those sorts of people who, they either struggle with wanting to do this in this way, or they see it and they don't want to be that way because they feel it's disingenuous?
Well, I think it's just, I think, again, it comes back to changing that perspective. As I was growing up through my career, I was a chief communications professional, and I was oftentimes reporting to the CEO. And a lot of times, you at the top, there's a lot of information coming, but a lot of times it's making sure that the executives get the right information. And so a lot of the CEOs, really great CEOs that I worked with, and a lot of the CEOs I've coached, they really like getting that feedback because they need it as they need it to be able to they like tooting the horns of people. They like sharing perspective. They like to know what's going on in the organization. So again, it's making a choice to whether you want to be a positive force in the organization or choose to be hidden away and hope someone will notice you. And I just think it's part of being proactive. But I do think you can do it in a very powerful and genuine way. Again, coming back to saying, how can I be really helpful? Put yourself in their shoes and think about it when you're in the leader spot and you've got a million things going on and you've got a wonderful employee who drops you a note on Fridays and said, hey, wanted to give you the highlights of the week. Here are some of the key successes. Oh, and by the way, if you have a minute, would you drop by Johnny Smith's desk because he did a really great job and I know he would love to hear from you on that. Leaders love it when you give them little ways that they can socialize success because there's so much pressure on them. And today, finding those tidbits and nuggets of positivity is really important. So if you think it's a game and you think it's something you don't want to play, and I think it's really beginning to shift your mindset because it really is a powerful communication, and communicating up, communicating out, and communicating effectively is part of being successful. So if you've got another mindset around it, then, do some mentoring, do some coaching, do some things to help you realize that, we have to kind of take a stand in our success. And maybe you've got a script that needs to be flipped.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and one of the things I tell people is it is about flipping your perspective. And if you feel disingenuous, really try to understand why is it being disingenuous to let other people know how great your team is. That in no way to me would that be disingenuous. And that's kind of what you can do when you're helping your senior colleagues when you're managing up. So.
The other thing I was going to say, Bill, is one of the things that I think is really important in leading up is making sure you find ways to get connected with your leader. And this sometimes is it feels like a bit of a game because I call it professional stalking. I have a client, for example, who actually an alum that I coached for a while, and she had they had an incredibly busy organization. Things were happening, and she just couldn't get any quality time with her boss, which left her feeling out of the loop, disenfranchised, busy, not feeling like she was giving her best. And I said, well, you got to find a way to really think about how you connect with your leader. And I said, just for a week or two, observe her patterns and behavior. When does she get in the office? When does she seem to be most relaxed? We just kind of watched. And she said, I realized that what she realized is they were on opposite schedules. Like she came in super early, and they had flex schedules, and she was in super early, and she was out by 4:30. She was living in New York at the time, and a lot of commuting and stuff. And she said, my boss gets in late. She's got kids, so she gets in late. She usually stays late. And I'm like, well, what if we tried something where, maybe one day a week, you tried to come in a little later, stay a little later, see if you could find some connection time. So sure enough, over the next few weeks, she was able to recognize that on Tuesdays, her boss, once 5:30 hit, her boss was much more relaxed. And so Tuesdays kind of became their thing where she could get some quality time with her boss. And she was able to, work her own schedule, almost 4 days a week. But on that Tuesday, she would stay a little later and make sure she got her connection time with her boss for, checking in, positive goodwill, making sure she was in the loop. So sometimes you just have to proactively begin to think about how do I find a way to connect with my leader? The other thing I think is really important is not just focusing everything on your leader, but also look to other leaders and build relationship across, because sometimes we do get bosses that are a bit disengaged, and we don't want to put our whole future there. So we just want to make sure that we are building relationships as a powerful part of our managing up and leading up. And I'm a big believer that you always have it. You always, for safety and security purposes, need to build a relationship that's at least 2 levels above you, if at all possible.
Yep, that makes total sense, and that's a great segue to some questions that we've had. Sarah was able to look through and give us a few questions that some of the audience members have beforehand, and so we kind of want to talk about these. Well, the first question that came in is, what are some keys to managing those who are maybe 5, 10, 20 years your senior? So if you're kind of, I guess it go both ways, how do you, if you're a leader of a team and those people might be older than you are, how do you manage that correctly or effectively? And then what happens if your boss might be 5, 10, 20 years older than you are, and you might not really connect with your boss that well? How do you go about managing up that way? What are some thoughts that you have about that, Jody?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves, or because we have this age difference, or we have this hierarchical difference, we begin to treat people differently. And the reality is, if you really think of, taking away the age difference and really think about, we're 2 people really trying to solve a business problem, or trying to relate in a way that we can connect to advance our business. So finding the common goal, that you're really there first and foremost to do a job, to be effective, to move the business forward. So really, again, it's getting your mindset in the right place, coming back to your mindset shift, and really thinking about, well, what do you need of me? What is important to you? How do you prefer to be connected with? What are we doing together? And even the use, I think we've talked about this, Bill, even the use of work together actually makes a powerful connection oftentimes, just because you're really promoting that you're working towards a common ground. And so I think, again, it's getting a comfort zone that, if you can think of people as people looking to solve business issues, then you're always walking in the world as more of a partner. And if you're treating people like a valuable partner, and you're operating with grace and respect of others, that plays well at most, in most any case. So really thinking through, first of all, trying to, get your own mindset right, that you're really 2 people trying to solve a business problem, and really understanding the needs of others, and listening, doing a lot of listening and really understanding before taking action. So a smart strategy always starts with good observation.
Yeah, that word together is so important. It's one of the studies that I saw. I think it came out from Stanford. There were teams that two different types of teams. One team were there, they heard the instructions, and then they went off and did the work. The other types of teams heard the same type of instructions, but the only word that changed was they heard the word together, as in together you're going to be doing this, together you're going to be going through this thing. And the teams that actually heard the word together, again, that was the only difference in these two different types of scenarios. They heard the word together. They were more effective. They stayed on task longer. They're more creative. There are all sorts of really great things that came out just by hearing the word together. So I liked what you said there, Jody, about the importance of thinking about how are we working on this together. It doesn't really matter how old we are, how young we are, the age difference that we have. One of the big pet peeves that I have is this whole generational thing. And, you know, in a past life, I was able to do some research at the Center for Creative Leadership, and we looked at what sort of a leader, or what are some important characteristics that leaders have. And we looked at it for baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials. And we found that millennials want a leader who is charismatic and team-oriented and humane-oriented. Guess what? Gen Xers want a leader who is charismatic and team-oriented and humane-oriented. And baby boomers, they want a leader who's charismatic and team-oriented and humane-oriented. Doesn't really matter what age you are. We all want the same type of person. There's a lot of studies out there too, like IBM did a study looking at why people leave an organization and why people stay with an organization and what they expect out of their leaders. And it doesn't matter what age group they were in, Gen Xers, baby boomers, millennials, they all left the organization for the same reason. They were all engaged with the organization for the same reason. So it's really less about age and more about figuring out who that person is and working together with that person, no matter how old or young or older or younger that person is than you. So
I would agree. Leadership wears well on anyone.
That's right. That's right. So let's go to this second question we have. What is the best litmus test from determining whether or when your boss is open to feedback? I think, you know, one of the things you talked about in that scenario that you said the person you were coaching found out just by observing that maybe if the person stayed later on that Tuesday, that might be a better way to go about it. So it's really about observing. But what are some other ways that you can think about determining whether or when your boss is open to feedback?
Well, if you're new on a team or it's a new situation for you, it's just talk with your colleagues and ask them what they've observed is what kind of style. So sometimes it's just asking. I think observing is probably one of the best things because people will tell you what you need to know. And also when you're watching people and how they behave, it's very different than what they say. They might say, oh, I have an open door policy. I'm open to feedback, but it won't take more than 2 or 3 meetings to really see that behavior come out. Meaning, how they react to people pushing back, how they respond to questions. Do they sit back and they open? Are they more directive? I mean, really, human behavior is quite fascinating in the fact that a majority of our communication is nonverbal, and so just watching how they behave, how they operate, can tell you a lot. But one of the things I always challenge people is to really figure out what's the best forum for getting your views and your connectivity and your communication across in the most powerful way. And a lot of times that's what do they say? Praise in public, criticize in private. And the same goes true oftentimes, in terms of providing critical feedback to your boss or something that might have, some heat to it or some difficulty to it. A lot of times it's just getting that quality time with them to really determine, how best to communicate that. But again, it's really interesting because, for example, the best litmus test is determining, it's just giving it a try and testing it out. And oftentimes it's really about how you frame it. And it's interesting because I have a client I'm coaching right now who's very seasoned communicator, but he has a boss that has a bit of an ego, and he comes across as very directive in meetings in public. He's definitely not a listener, but we have found that when he has time to go back and share perspective, and he'll go back and socialize 2 or 3 things, and he'll give him some points and some counterpoints, that all of his messages show up in the next meeting. So a lot of times all the clues are there. It's just really kind of, testing it out a little bit, observing, talking with your colleagues, and seeing, like any relationship, is really getting your data so you know how to approach it in the healthiest way.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, for new leaders, they're very new to this. They've been head down, getting the work done, and now they have to really broaden their perspective. And what's the best litmus test for determining whether your boss is open to feedback? Use the peers that you have. Just like you said, observe, ask your peers what they think about your boss, ask others what they might think about your boss, just to get information. And if all else fails, I tell people I've never seen an announcement for a job or the roles and responsibilities for a job that said you must be a mind reader. Never seen that. So if you really don't know, think about how you can have that conversation with your boss and say, hey, I'd like to really understand your style. And maybe give 1 or 2 options for you to do. One of the things that I had with a previous boss, I actually asked, would it be, I was thinking about how my work is. Would you like to know at the end of the week all the things that I've done? Just so that you can kind of have an idea of what's going on. Those sort of conversations, and seeing if that hits the right button for your boss or not can help gauge certain things as well. So I just tell people, find out what others think, and then if all else fails, try to find out yourself.
Well, I think too, as new leaders, sometimes, like you said, just asking and saying, hey, obviously I'm in a new leadership role,
right,
and I'm looking at it from one perspective. And would you be willing to let me share something, and then you give me feedback on it? So sometimes the art of you presenting something and asking them to give you feedback is a great reverse counter measure, because you're essentially saying, I had a differing point of view, but I want you to, give me your perspective. So even though you're providing a counterpoint, you're actually asking them for feedback, which then opens the two-way dialogue. So, but we have to be willing to, put our point of view out and say, hey, I had some things that I was thinking about, and it differs a little bit from what you had shared, and I wanted to really run it by you to see, am I looking at it? We talked early on about having a growth mindset. How am I looking at this? I want to learn. You're a new leader. You're really learning how to think and grow and stretch your perspective. And so just even putting yourself out there a lot of times and saying, hey, as the leader, challenge my assumptions. I'm looking at it this way. It seems that this might be a better path, or help me understand the broader perspective. So even asking for help around the feedback can be very powerful, because most leaders, especially if you're a new leader or an emerging leader, by putting yourself and demonstrating an openness for vulnerability, hopefully, if they're a moderate to good leader, they're usually going to, create a space for you to have a dialogue about it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good transition into this last question that I have. Do you have any advice in transitioning a management relationship into a mentoring one? So maybe, they've had this, their boss has been kind of their manager, and now they kind of want to transition that into a mentoring one, maybe a couple years down the road, now that they've kind of established themselves a little more. Have any thoughts about that?
Well, actually, this is an interesting one from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, how do you get your boss to be your mentor? Because sometimes that in itself is a challenge, because you have a lot to do, but yet you want to have a career conversation. Yep. And so sometimes, in the right framework, I even, suggest to clients that you set up and be very clear about what role, because as human beings, we don't play dual roles very well. You know, it's kind of like today I got to be the boss, tomorrow I got to be the mentor. Yesterday I had to be a friend, tomorrow I have to be. So we are going through these multiple roles. And so a lot of times when you're working with your boss and you've got some career aspirations or some things that are more developmental in nature and saying, hey, I'd really like to see if we could get 30 minutes. My agenda is one that's more mentoring focused. And really calling it that you're asking them to put on their mentor hat. You know, or you've been thinking about some things that you want to develop and grow, and you're not really coming, and you want to make sure you get them at a time when they're not so head down in the weeds working on something, big deadline. So timing of that is very important in terms of timing conversations, and when you want to get quality mentoring conversations versus, hey, I need, you know, you to have on my manager leader hat. But I think it's really great. I think to actually transitioning a management relationship into a mentoring one is a great one, especially if it's after the fact, because you already have that history in that relationship. And even though your reporting relationship has changed, being able to say to that leader, hey, you taught me so much, or hey, you have a style that I really learned a lot from. What is it you hope to learn from them and continue learning, and say, I want to keep that part of that valuable relationship. And I have to tell you, a majority of people have to be extremely flattered that that you feel strong enough about that relationship that you want to keep checking in and touching base and having that good two-way relationship. Because I think at the end of the day, I think that 80% of human beings want to give back. They want to be helpful. They want to grow others. It's just, you know, making sure that you state your case on what you're hoping to continue to learn from them, because every communication has a purpose. Every relationship has to have some sort of purpose. And so just making sure that learning agenda and that perspective is always clear. You know, and also just continuing that relationship, wanting to know how people are doing and connecting. And I think it's just part of nurturing your ecosystem of relationships.
Yeah, you know, one of the best ways that people can understand about controlling their careers, they actually have to control their career themselves. So if you go into that conversation, say for instance, you're going to your boss and you really want your boss to have more of a mentoring mindset than a manager mindset, go in there, give the boss the heads up, say, you know, in the meeting that we have later this week, here are some issues and some problems I'm having. I'd really like to hear from you as from kind of a more mentoring or coaching perspective. So being in charge of that agenda going forward for a current manager. And then, you know, a few years down the road, if you want to transition and you really enjoyed having that manager and being more of a mentoring one, just like Jody said, you can craft that and go with that. So what we're going to wrap up, we have about 15 or 20 minutes left, and I do want to go over a couple scenarios that were given to us as well, and then I'm going to ask Sarah if she has any questions halfway through here so we can make sure we get to any. But there was one scenario that this person had. She's a woman leader. How do you manage up well when you're a woman and you report to a very reactive, low EQ, micromanaging male leader? So there's all sorts of different aspects. There's a gender aspect there. There's also different styles of leaders. You know, it's reactive, it's low EQ, and it's the micromanager. So what are some thoughts that you have, Jody, about what this person can do?
Wow, you got the trifecta of workplace trauma going there. Any one of those can be a challenge, but having all three.
Definitely.
I think that, you know, making sure you've got good support systems, because again, it's really, I think a lot of times any of those type issues can make us react and really tap our own emotional intelligence. And so, you know, and particularly for women, because I also, you know, do a lot of teaching on women in leadership and leadership power for women, and emotional control is women have such strong, powerful advantage over men in their EQ, except for the issue of emotional control, which is how we hold emotion when we're feeling strong emotion. If you're working with somebody who doesn't have that, it can be a real challenge. But again, I advocate, in any of that scenario, to do your best to really seek to understand, call it for what it is. You've identified there's a multitude of issues, and a lot of times we have ebbs and flows in our career, and if it's an organization we want to be with and be successful, identify and begin to think about where you can find common ground. One of the things I tell folks is identify again, this is really not about you, it's about you outsmarting or being savvy in a very difficult situation, which means you have to step up to a higher plane than your boss is. And so I always say you almost have to step into a higher form of leadership to really survive these kind of dynamics sometimes. And it does feel a little bit like survival because things are coming at you, they're highly reactive. And I'm very empathic to this because I've probably had that scenario once or twice in my own career, and it's very stressful. But I think you have to learn how to maneuver difficult bosses, and somebody is succeeding. So I always say, look for the positivity, like look for any inkling that somebody's being successful and figure out what are some of the short-term strategies that can help you be successful despite the dynamics. And if it's something that if it's something that long term, this is an organization, or this is an organization that maybe has different groups. Sometimes I think you can learn a lot from it, but if it's going to be more than 6 months to a year, it can be quite stressful. And so I always say, the best thing you can do is shop for a leader or find another scenario. When you've got that kind of trifecta, seek coaching or mentoring to help you navigate through it, because any one of those issues alone can be challenging.
Yeah. And if you're new to leadership as well, I really liked what you said before. This is kind of like the first time in your life that you can actually use the excuse of being new to really forward your own understanding of what's going on in the organization. So, hey, I'm new to this leadership thing. I really want to do well and succeed in this. So can you help me understand kind of your perspective on things? Because this is what I'm seeing, but I really want to seek out and understand your own perspective. Hopefully that will get you all working again together to do those things effectively.
The other thing I would challenge, and this is just for the women on the call, again, that emotional control. I think when we're first starting out as new leaders, a lot of times men and women both experience this kind of emotion. But I think that this is where, as women, we have to find the support systems, because a lot of times if you're more relationship based, if you value relationships and you've got somebody who doesn't, it can feel hard. But I think this is really where I know for me personally, growing up through various CEOs, and I remember my coach one time saying to me, Jody, not everybody, I know you value relationships, but not every leader you work with is going to be the godparent of your children or somebody you want to have dinner with or beers with every night of the week. And realize that you can cultivate relationships. And I think it's a tenet of leadership. And I think this is why I was so very blessed to have a coach very early in my career, because he said, a tenet of leadership, and this comes also from Kouzes and Posner's great work on the practices of exemplary leaders, is sometimes you have to work with leaders who have a different value system than you do. And I think for new leaders, and this is all new, we've got this new role and we've got these new responsibilities and we've got these new pressures that we're putting on ourselves to be successful. And all of a sudden we're not feeling successful because it's putting us outside of our value system. And so that's why I think it's a real great time that's why I think, if I could wish anything, getting people a coach early, or getting into a coaching group, or getting into support leadership type work can really help you, because a lot of times you have to work with people who candidly you might not even like very much. And that means you're going to have to find the common ground to move forward, because that's what leadership is about. So it really is it's an early opportunity to really step into thinking about how you're going to operate as a leader and how you're going to work, because a lot of time we're still reacting very emotionally ourselves. And then two unemotionally intelligent people, it's not a recipe for success. So I always say it's time you got to step up.
Yeah. What we've talked about before is you have to be in control of your own career. So finding those people to help. I always talk about having peer mentoring or mentoring circles. And if you go to your HR folks and say, hey, can you help us start a mentoring program, a peer mentoring program, a mentoring circle program where you and other new leaders, maybe 3 to 5 other ones, are meeting once a week, talking about what you're struggling with. You can get that peer-to-peer mentoring, and you're going through the same struggles as new leaders. But then if you can also get paired up with a person who wants to give back, who may be more senior in the organization and who wants to be that mentor, to get that kind of top-down mentoring as well, it's a wonderful way to get that sort of support from your own peers and from the top down. And if your HR can't do that, find it yourself. Go out there and find a couple people who you can, once a week or once a month, have a sort of conversation around what you're doing right now, and then maybe you can find it on your own. That could be a pretty good thing to do.
I was going to also add, Bill, I think that sometimes when we're having it, we're afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's survival of the fittest. And, we've talked about this many times, which is why this series is so important, that we don't, leaders don't get formal training until they're 42, which means, from 28 to 42, it's survival of the fittest, and it can be very stressful. We're new. We don't have a rule book for this. And so sometimes, and it's also how you ask for help. To be able to go to maybe an HR business partner, if you're in a large enough company where you can say, hey, could I ask for some mentoring? I've got my boss, and you've got to make sure you're positioning it as a learning experience, because again, are you being proactive? Are you seeing this as a solution or a problem? Because a lot of times as a new leader, we see the negative in it versus seeing, and so a lot of times we'll go and complain, my boss is difficult, I'm not being able to do this, blah, blah, blah. But what you can say is, look, I have a boss and I'm in a new leadership role, and this is the first time I've faced this, and he has a different style, and I am trying to learn how to be successful in this environment, and wondered if maybe I could get some peer mentoring or some business partner mentoring, that maybe you could help me in terms of what you've seen work well with him, and maybe give me some tips and pointers, because as a new leader, I'm still learning. The other thing is find people who have been successful. I had one leader at a major Fortune 50 company, and when she went to work for a particular leader, and this particular leader was very, very difficult, one of the things that she did was really go and talk to past employees that had moved on to other groups and said, hey, you were able to survive this particular leader and do well. What was the secret of your success? And so even going outside the group, people have left the group, particularly in large organizations, because again, sometimes we can have really great relationships with, matter of fact, I think some of the best relationships I've ever had with leaders were ones that were really, really difficult, because you really work hard to figure out who they are. And if you can win that, kind of cross that finish line to figure out how to work with them, it's almost like you've won a race that not many will run. So it can be extra challenging, but if you win it, you can have a relationship that can be quite strong.
Very cool. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left. I want to make sure that if there's any other questions, Sarah, that you've gotten from the attendees.
Yep. So I'm curious, Jody, you mentioned that it is important to forge a relationship with someone who's 2 levels up, and I think that's great advice. But even meeting or developing a relationship with someone 1 or 2 levels up can be quite challenging. So any recommendations about how to get in the room with those people, since you might not be invited to the same meetings and FaceTime can be difficult?
I figure out, one of my clients, for example, with a major technology company, got her best opportunities to work with leaders. She worked on a major volunteer initiative. So she took on a special project that had her working with all the higher level executives in a way that she never even dreamed possible, because they were working on like a Habitat for Humanity build or something that the senior executives were involved in. So she got to know them in a way that was very different than being in the work environment, and built some really strong relationships. So, you may not be in the work meetings, but find other ways. You have to look for the opportunity. What are they involved in? What are they engaged in? How do you begin to think about how you build a relationship with that person? Finding a way to, get that face time. And sometimes it's just blatantly asking. I mean, I had one client that just, asked the CFO if he ever did mentoring, because she had a specific agenda she was hoping to learn, and he exhibited 2 or 3 skill sets that she thought was really important for her. And she got, quarterly visits with the CFO, and she asked, and she was probably 4 or 5 levels below. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask. But the other thing is, if they can't do it or won't do it, or they have no time to do it, they'll refer you to somebody, and that gets you a hand up to somebody usually pretty important. And I had a client in a college setting that asked really connected with the president, and she got to see him on a quarterly basis. But anytime they met, he would say, "Oh, you know who you need to talk to," and he would pick up the phone and connect her with lots of other folks in the university. And that all came from the fact that there was something in his leadership style that we put on her agenda that she wanted to learn. And she just went and said, when they had an opportunity to connect, she said, "I don't know where you are on your mentoring of others, but could I get 30 minutes? Here's what my agenda is." And he said, "Absolutely." And so sometimes it doesn't even hurt to ask, but if you don't, usually they can refer you to some pretty good people.
You're right. It's all about putting yourself out there, which can be scary, but
absolutely. All they can say is no.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. And before we close out, since the whole point of this is managing up, and you mentioned many ways in which you can make it easier for your manager to share wins and what you should be bringing to them. So could we walk through your suggested one-on-one when the employee's coming in and they're supposed to drive the agenda? What do you think the ideal situation is for them to structure that time?
From a mentoring standpoint, or communication
from an
standpoint?
employee coming in and meeting with their boss, how should they be running that agenda to make the time most effective?
Well, I use I use a little technique I call the path of discovery, and it really it kind of flows very similar to kind of how the brain flows in storytelling. So I try at the highest level, give them and I'll just kind of run through the kind of 6 steps. The first is just a quick snapshot of reality, what's happening, positive, negative, neutral. The second step is really visioning what I'm hoping to accomplish in our meeting today, or and asking, if they have anything specific that they're looking to accomplish. Key obstacles would be the third step. Hey, here are key challenges I'm facing. Fourth is solutions, really talking through different options, different things you're trying, where you might need help in talking through solutions. The fifth is, how am I measuring success? And the sixth step is, hey, at the end of the meeting, how do we feel we're doing with each other? How do you feel this is going, whether we're talking about a business initiative, a team initiative, or an enterprise initiative? Just kind of doing that emotional check-in. How do you think we're doing together on this? And is there any additional feedback or opportunity for the things that we need to discuss? So I really coach around, kind of always kind of walking through a high level, story. I think a lot of times we come in with a laundry list of things out of context. So learning how to kind of build a story, frame it, and also tailor it to the time. Do you have 15 minutes? Do you have 30 minutes? Do you have an hour? You really need to know how you tell your story across a continuum of time, and that just takes practice oftentimes. As I said, one of the things when I teach in executive communication is be bright, be brief, be clear, and be gone. It's part of just learning how to oftentimes get the most bang for your time with folks. So that's one of the little techniques I teach folks at a very high level. And if people want depth, they'll go back in and ask specific questions as you go through it. So
That's great. I love that setup. So great for everyone to take down. And again, this was all recorded, so we can go back through and take notes again, and join us for part 3, organizational politics. That's going to be a meaty one on August 23rd, 12 Eastern time. And please feel free, and also go ahead, submit your scenarios or questions in advance so that we can prepare for that. Jody and Bill, thank you so much for your time calling in from North Carolina and Europe. We really appreciate you coming together. And check out Be the Boss Everyone Wants to Work For. If you'd like to check out the whole book, it is on Amazon, and I will send a follow-up email with information on all the things we covered here today. So hope everyone has a great rest of the week.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.